Mark from Skywagons University. This is going to be a video that's completely nothing to do with aircraft. It's just something else that I do. I'm going to make a gun stock from a blank chunk to a completely finished gun in time lapse in one, maybe two videos. So start off with a chunk like this. It's black walnut. These two were once joined together. I think they were like that or something, but they were the same piece of wood. This weighs about 14 pounds the way it is. And with these tools, basic tools, there's a Dremel here for some fine interior sort of inletting work, and then these two rasps, they're called surforms, and I use them with and without their handles, but these are the majority of the wood removal. Without those you can't do it. And then the rest is like thick sandpaper for wrapping around the rasp, some chisels, some files, smaller, and I do a lot of rolling up for like detail, but you'll see all that in the video. And then the finished product is this, and that is the same piece of wood as that. They were once growing together in the same tree. It's got ebony here, a little bit of ebony on there, and it's unfinished. This is it at its final sanded stage. So you can see it over on this side too. No cheek piece here, and there's a cheek piece here. I'm right-handed, and a little white spacer on it. But it'll be, the first video will be making this from this in time lapse, and the second video will be shorter, and it'll just be literally the how to put the oil finish on it. But that's it in its final installation. And this stock, when it's without the mechanism in it, weighs about 4 pounds. So I rasped off with those 10 pounds of sawdust, which is everywhere in there. But we'll get on with it. Thank you. This is the blank piece of wood that I bought for the gun stocks. I thought there'd be one in it, but there was actually two in it. This is the two stocks after I've drawn around the original and cut them out with the bandsaw. One was slightly smaller than the other. And here you can see the original stock relative to them. So they're bigger, so there's a lot of room for improvement on them. So I've chosen this Savage 93 with a very bland stock on it. It's a 22 mag. Nothing wrong with the stock at all, but I just took it off because I wanted to make it nicer. So you put the stock on the blank that fits, draw around it, and add a cheek piece, add some length, make it fit to whatever you need it to fit. I used a permanent marker because pencil's hard to see with the sawdust on the bandsaw. Add a little bit of detail. Then put it on the bandsaw and cut off the excess. So just a little bit extra on the cheek piece, shorten it a bit. Take off the top so the forend is the right thickness. There's a lot of waste. The wood ends up losing about 80% of its volume, but you end up with what you need. That worked. Then you put it in the vise and you start rasping. I always mark on the end of the recoil pad because it's a guide to the size of the stock. Shirt comes off because of the heat, because of the use, and then I use the round surform for the detail in the corners and the flat surform for the large surface areas. It's quite time consuming, but you just start to feel what the gun stock looks like, and you just remove the wood that isn't it. So it becomes a thick, heavy version of itself. And over time you refine it and you make it smaller and smaller and smaller until it's exactly what it should be. You draw on the guides to give you somewhere where you can work towards, but then you actually rasp them off. So you have to keep putting them on. And here I'm flattening down the area and getting ready to put on the cheek piece. And you don't need to put on a cheek piece, but I'm going to use a scope on this gun, so I used a cheek piece. I use the round surform. If you use it in a single line, it'll make a trench, but if you use it horizontally, it'll make a flat surface. So you use it and the flat one. The flat one can do larger areas. You just keep removing wood. The vise is not gripping the wood here as well as it should. So this is the time consuming part. It's removing the bulk of the wood. Make the pistol grip thinner. And as each piece becomes more and more like what it should be like, you make it smaller, smaller, smaller. You can't do any one thing exactly all the way down to the bottom. I always keep the fore end big and square and thick because the vise has to grip it. So I'll thin it a bit as we progress, but I want to keep it very wide so that the barrel channel will fit in it, and then narrow it down after the barrel channel is in it. And you can see on the end of the stock I've kind of sanded it, I've rasped it down to almost the size of the recoil pad, thinning the fore end, basically just removing a lot of wood, getting a lot of the bulk out of it. Never stay in one place too long, always do a bit of the fore end, and here you can see the top of the stock is not inletted yet because the vise has to grip it, and there they are in comparison with the old one. Keep comparing with the old one. And then make the pistol grip thinner, then reduce the cheek piece a bit. Because at the moment it's a thick version of itself. You just make it less and less and less and less and less. And I found using the Dremel with a little head on it, you'll see in some of the photographs which head that is. The Dremel will get into some of the concave nooks and crannies more easily than the Surforms. But you're just removing wood, it's hours of work. But you'll get to feel what the gun needs, what it looks like. So here I'm putting the recoil pad on it because it's a guide to the size of the profile of the end of the stock. So I drill it out, put it on. It doesn't have to be beautiful, but it has to be the right shape, so you know not to go below that point. So I'll always leave it just above the level of the recoil pad to allow me to sand to it, but it makes you know to not make it too small. And then you can taper everything, keep all the flat surfaces flat, the round surface is round, and it's continually just removing the bulk. The round Surform gets in the nooks and crannies, the flat one gets on the large surface areas, but you can actually use the round one on large surface areas if you slide it sideways. But you can see me swapping between the two very, very frequently. Okay, now the barrel channel. I started off with the Surform, I auger it out with the Dremel, make a groove. It's much too wide at the moment, which is what I needed, and then I'll hollow it out with the Surform, put the other stock in next to it side by side for comparison, and then I'll use the Dremel to hollow the middle out. And you just compare the two. Mark it, chisel it, hollow it out, and I haven't gone right through at this stage. Then I'll measure and make sure that the interior is right, chisel off the sides. Now the underside. Mark off where the magazine goes in, where the trigger guard appears, where the screws are, and then just drill them out. Always make it smaller than you need so you can improve afterwards. Clean it up with the Dremel, clean it up with the chisel. You can always remove wood, you can never add it. And then here I'm just comparing the two and just cleaning it up. Now I'm just fine tuning it, put the mechanism in, and see where it touches. There's breakfast. You put grease on the bottom of the action, and when you lower it in and take it back out, where the grease has left a spot is a high point, and you just file that bit off. So you just take it out, put it in, take it out, put it in 1,000 times. And you'll see the mechanism slowly sinking in. Wherever the grease touches, you remove. This is where I'm using the Surform without the handle on, because the handle gets in the way when I'm hollowing out the barrel channel, and the barrel channel seems to be almost exactly the same size. And the fore end is still thick here, so you'll make sure that it fits and it's in before you narrow down the fore end. So I just want it to sit completely into the stock the way it does on the original stock. Be careful with the vise because now it's hollow. Bit of grease, put it in, take it out, chisel off the high points. Whatever tool it needs, just chisel off the high points, and the mechanism will slowly sink further and further in. More and more grease, and every time you take it out you'll see the piece that needs to be chiseled off because it'll be the point with the grease on it. And you'll notice slowly it sinks further and further in. The barrel channel has to be slightly lower than the actual barrel. The mechanism holds the stock, but the barrel channel does not touch, it floats. And as you use the grease, you keep it, because where it touches, it'll use it. So you have to replace it and then just Dremel it off or chisel it off, and slowly but surely it'll fit. There's an area where the safety catch moves. You have to clean that up too. Make sure nothing that moves, like a trigger or a safety catch, touches anything in its movement. So, and then the groove here for the bolt, mark where it is, put grease on the bolt, operate the bolt, it touches, file it off. It touches, file it off until the bolt completely closes but doesn't touch wood. And you can make it smaller than the original, because the original is just a factory stamped stock. So you can make it look a little bit more refined. This is just fine-tuning it. It's a very long process. Marking the sides is just showing me the excess wood. There's the finished stock, like looking more stock-like. It's got the ebony cap on the pistol grip, but I'm going to put a bit of ebony on the end, on the fore end as well. This is now removing all the excess weight, because the barrel channel is in, so I know how I can taper it down to it. So with the flat surform, you just reduce the volume, just take off as much wood as you can down to the taper that you want. As you remove the taper, you're going to see the pistol grip's going to be fat, so you make it get smaller too, but it's just both sides of the fore end, pistol grip, both sides of the fore end, pistol grip, and you just keep going until the whole thing is actually just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The bit of plywood in the vise is to stop the vise crushing the newly hollowed out inlet. You can't grip it as hard as you used to be able to, because now there's not enough wood there. So be careful how you grip it. I've got padded, the jaws of the vise are padded at this point, because some of the wood you're going to be gripping is going to be something you want to keep. Making the fore end smaller and smaller and smaller. Now I'm going to put on the ebony tip cap. Slightly different view here. The Dremel is just cleaning up around where the pistol grip is, getting rid of some of the excess wood around the ebony tip grip cap. If you've got a sanding disc, it helps. You can do it by hand, but the sanding disc will reduce the volume of wood pretty quickly. So on here I'm just going to mark it and cut off an angle of the fore end so that the black tip is at the 45 degrees, and that's a piece of ebony I've got. You can't see it behind the barricade there, but it's just shaping it down to the size I need. It's bigger than you need when you glue it on, but it's literally just wood glue. So I just glued on the ebony tip with Gorilla wood glue, and I put on the wood either side of it to hold it in place while it was drying, clamped it. There's no pins, there's no nothing in it. Once it's on, this is a quick clip of the ebony tip cap and grip going on it. Just shaping it to shape. That is held on there literally only by the glue. There isn't a pin in it. There's no load on it when it's in use. So you've just got to be able to make it be able to withstand the working of it when you're putting it on. And it's obviously twice as thick as it should be, because if you chip the edges, you want to be able to reduce it down to what you want in the end. So same with the fore end. So once it's sanded flat and level and made to be completely in line with the rest of the wood, you put the barrel channel in it, sand the sides, make sure the barrel fits it. And it's still quite thick and it's still quite crude, but it's just the final fitting of the mechanism in before you do the outside finishing. The ebony is much harder to sand, so make sure that when you're sanding it, you allow for that, because if you put the same weight on the walnut, it'll wear it out much faster. Rotary sanders are good for getting large surface areas. Use about 100 grit sandpaper on it to remove bulk, and I'm trying to get it down to the almost final profile. Be careful with it though, because it'll remove a sharp edge very fast. The forend is rounded, but it still has its corners. So here I'm just going to remove one of its corners and show the difference of what it's like before and after. You've got to keep them both the same. Remember, the ebony is much harder, so spend more time on it. You'll see the grain starting to come around the corner when it's rounded off too. It looks pretty nice. Don't stay in one place too long with a rotary sander, it'll remove a lot of wood. Keep it moving. So now I'm just sanding it with a bit of wood with a piece of belt sanding 100 grit sandpaper on it. It's very rough and very, this sandpaper does not wear out. You put it around a piece of wood, 100 grit, and it removes a lot of wood. And because it's on a piece of wood, it'll flatten any errors down. I keep carpet on my workbench so I don't damage the other side of the wood while I'm sanding on it. But 100 grit removes a lot of wood. Keep it even. Make it a little bit tight around the piece of wood so the loose end doesn't sand on anything it shouldn't. The forend is getting narrower and narrower now. It's getting down to the point where it almost is going to be on the finished profile. I'd say that about 50% of the time is spent sanding. You make the profile and then you just sand. So the mechanism fully fits. The forend isn't rounded off yet on the end, on the black tip of the ebony. This is just making sure the last little bit of it goes in before I get too committed. Drilling out a screw hole for mounting the stock from the inside. Checking it against the old stock for the depth. That's a screw hole for the magazine and the trigger guard. And I'm using bigger and bigger drills. Rather than go straight in with a big drill, I go bigger, bigger, bigger until it's the right one. And then check that the screw fits. The original screw was flush mounted. I countersunk it. But I'll show you that a little bit later. Just make sure the trigger protrudes enough. The stock is thick enough top to bottom so the magazine goes in and the trigger protrudes the same amount as the old stock does. You'll be putting that mechanism in and out of there a lot. Remember, don't tighten the vise too much when it's hollow. A little bit of trigger clearance, a bit of bolt clearance, a bit of safety catch clearance. Make sure everything works exactly the way the old stock does, and use the old stock as a template. Just dremeling out a little bit of more clearance on the magazine. Needed a little bit more light to see it. Now I'm using the round surform with the really rough sandpaper from the belt sander wrapped around it, and it fits in the groove perfectly and becomes a sanding stick. And it just removes all the rough teeth marks of the surform, so you can do the whole thing and get it down to a sandable level without having to use the you don't have to sand for so long because it's so rough. Now I'm putting in the two little flutes either side of the cheek piece. Just cosmetic, but it makes them look nice. This 100 grit sandpaper will remove a lot of wood. As we get later into it, the finer stuff is more polishing, but this is actually still removing wood. And you're getting it down to the final profile now. Now on the end, it's very hard wood, so I use the orbital sander. Randomly move it all over the place and keep checking it. That's probably 100 grit sandpaper in the disc, and then a belt sander just handheld, like you're polishing a shoe. Give it a kind of organic, uniform, round profile. Finer and finer. Ebony doesn't make sawdust, it makes dust. It makes talcum powder dust, it's so hard. So that's the stock made.
the final construction and fit. So the next video is going to be of how to put the finish on it. These are the tools that I've used: a Surform, a round one, a flat one, and the sandpaper I wrap around the blades of each. And the blades can be used on their own without the handles, which is just a way of getting close to the action. A couple of files, one is smaller, one's larger. That's for the nooks and crannies where you can't get in the detail. A Dremel with 3 bits. The best bit of the 3 I mostly used was the teardrop one in the center, even though the flat one is used for corners and areas where you can get into a square. The chisels, one is flat, 2 round ones, and then of course the orbital sander and the drill, which I use momentarily just for hollowing it out. This is my vise. It's not my only vise, but it's I use it with the padded jaws when I'm doing the final finishing on it. You've got to have something that holds the stock in place while you're working on it, and you've got to make sure that it doesn't damage the wood. So if you want to see how to actually put the final finish on the gun stock, go to the next video and it'll end up looking like this photograph. It'll be a detailed description of how to put on a final finish on this or any gun stock you're finishing. So thanks for watching. This is Mark from Skywagons University. Make sure to subscribe on the link below and click on the little bell to get notifications.